Hi there, welcome back to another CPaaSAA Talk. And today I'm here with Greg and Zach from Mobile Seasons. Really excited because we're starting a partnership with these guys who are the organizers of developer communities and events like droidcon, which is really cool. So we're talking for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so about that amazing, as I see it, that sort of interesting disconnect between the telco world and the developer world. And in the world of telcos, I mean, for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about network APIs and Project Camara and how important it is and how great it is for all the developers in the world to start to use that because there's so many cool things you can do on the network. And then it was interesting, Greg, because when we had a prep call a couple of weeks ago, one of the first things you said was, remind me network APIs. What are those exactly? So clearly we have a disconnect still between these two worlds. And I'd love to get your thoughts on really how that works. So, Greg, let me start with you. When you hear network APIs, right, or when you heard network APIs, what was going through your head when we talked about that?
I think mostly my was trying to sort of categorize it, put it in the right box, put it in the right category, and of course my approach there was thinking about what exactly do they do, what exactly do they solve, and I had mentioned to you before that I think again, most first of all, I think most developers just think about APIs, not necessarily the category, but they also think certainly about, most frequently I think about device APIs, camera, sensors, GPS, or cloud APIs. But the network API threw me for a second because I was thinking, and from the telcos, I'm thinking, okay, what exactly are the problems that they're trying to solve? And that wasn't an immediate, there wasn't an immediate connect with the neurons sort of connected, said network APIs, telcos, I know exactly what the pain point is they're solving. So that was sort of the disconnect that we had initially with the terminology.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you talk about categories because Zach, I mean, in a previous life, you were a developer, DevRel, I don't know what the official name was,
Developer
for
advocate.
one, yeah, for advocate, for one of the big CPaaS players, right? Which, um, and you could argue that CPaaS 15 years ago didn't exist, right? So that was at some point, that became a category, and focused first on messaging and then on different sorts of communications. So how was that experience for you? Being at the time, and I think we can mention, I mean, you started Nextmo, that got acquired by Vonage, which is now part of Ericsson, and Ericsson is really big on this network API thing. So it's very, very interesting to look back at how did this all work when Nextmo was just sort of starting up years and years ago, trying to create this new category.
Yeah, I think the thing is, certainly when network APIs started being a thing, communication APIs had become very mature by this point. But I think a lot of people kind of maybe forget the early days of communication APIs. And yes, here in 2026, a developer can write a single line of code and they can send a text message, and it's lovely. But 15 years ago, it was a very different world. It only worked with certain carriers. You had very strict rules around it in terms of like who you could send to, and it was a mess. It's taken 15 years to kind of build this nice environment for developers to use. So naturally, when something new starts like network APIs, it's going to be in that original world again, where it only works with certain telcos, it only works with certain connections, and you have to be in a certain place in the world, and all these sorts of things. So it's hard, I think, or rather, I think a lot of people kind of forgot that that pain did exist and exists again. They were kind of hoping for this magic world where everything was going to be good because, oh, we can just do what we did with CPaaS.
Yeah, I like how you make draw that parallel because I remember those early days of CPaaS, and indeed it was. I mean, everything that started to work was sort of magic, right? Now it was all of a sudden possible to do. I don't know, as a message and then roaming and then this and that, which we now take for granted. And I think you're right that network API is in a very similar situation now. It's starting to work in certain countries with certain carriers, and there's some versioning issues still. And then, so the success of the CPaaS players in the old days was that they sort of they were that interface. They did that harmonization and they made it work for all these different things. Whereas now maybe the thinking in the world of network APIs and telcos is a little bit too much. If we standardize it and we get all the telcos to run the same version of the same API, then we can do federation and we could do all these telco things. And maybe that just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I think that's where sort of CPaaS companies are still going to have a place to play is aggregating that, particularly for developers. I don't think, there's different worlds here where an enterprise customer who has a fleet of developers at their disposal, yeah, they'll probably want to do the aggregation themselves. They'll have very complex logic that decides which telco to use at which time, what route to take. But then you have the kind of developer communities and the smaller players, the startups, the indie developers, maybe even, who really don't want to have to handle that and really want to be able to send a single API request, and someone else is worrying about how that actually reaches their customer.
Yeah. So when you think about, let's switch to communities, right? Because you've been building you've been in community building for years and years and years, and I think that's another thing that's interesting when you think of the telco industry and the, let's say, software industry in general, and developers and startups. It's a different vibe, right? Next week is Mobile World in Barcelona, and it's funny because there's actually a separate part of the event in the old Vira, where it's all about developers and hackathons and neon lights and free ice cream and I don't know, ping pong tables and all the things that we think that developers that motivates developers. So it's funny. It's great. I think that GSMA is organizing that and they're working with startups and they're working with startup communities locally in Barcelona, etc. So it's great. But it's also, it shows that there's still such a disconnect between these two worlds. So thinking of, from your experience building communities for developers, really, I mean, what should telcos or what should the industry do better or differently to get to these developers, to get developers to accept and to work with network APIs more?
I'll take a stab, Zach. I think that's a big question, Rob, that you're asking. How to work with developer communities. But I would just say, let's start by understanding the motivation first. What is going to motivate developers? And I've seen this over the years with developer communities. We've worked with a lot of companies, organizations that want to push, I'll say, certain capabilities. We've worked, for instance, over the years, but with hardware, semiconductor companies that are building the hardware and processors in the smartphones and in the devices, saying, we want to expose some really cool APIs to help developers. So when you talk to them about capabilities, my thing is, I don't think developers really are interested or adopt capabilities so much. They adopt solutions to pain. And that's really interesting. So I think if we're going to talk about working with developer communities, I really think that the telcos need to understand the motivation. And there I do think is often a disconnect, because I think they're thinking, here's the capabilities, we're going to push this out there and they can do this. But I think the developer thinks different. It's, what do they understand the pain that I'm feeling today and what I have to solve? Do they understand, I think it's talking about, what can I build today now with this that I couldn't build yesterday? And how does that solve friction? So I think that's one of the primary, I guess that's the starting point to me, is if you're going to work with developers, understand what the motivation is.
Yeah.
And Zach, you might have similar thoughts or different thoughts, in fact,
No,
from your Vonage.
I think I completely agree. I think that's the place that you have to start. But then there is a lot more that has to be done after that point. I think you have to identify the problems that you're solving and show those to developers so they understand, oh yeah, okay, I can use this for X, Y. But then the next step is making sure that it's easy for developers to access and test out. I think that's kind of where the whole developer relations side of things comes in, is making sure that you have good documentation, you have a developer portal that developers can go to and they can understand what your APIs do, but then also they have some way to actually access and use them. Now, Obviously, that will probably be a sandbox. Certainly at this stage in the world of network APIs, there's a lot of regulation that has to be done. There's a lot of sign up and everything else to actually use it in the real world. But you should have that sandbox capability. You should have that way for developers to actually try it out. And it needs to be as frictionless as possible. There needs to be, within 10 minutes, a developer will make a decision as to whether or not they actually want to use this thing. And so within those 10 minutes, they need to have been able to try it out, even if it is just fake sandbox. So, that is a very important step, because I think the thing is, obviously, you can work with product owners, with decision makers, to convince them that this is a thing that they need. They need network APIs. They need to implement it. But if they're that company's developers can't then actually do the implementation easily, they're going to get a lot of headaches. They're going to get a lot of pushback, and it's probably going to end up being a project that stalls. So
I like how you bring. I like how you mention, let's say, the product owners and founders and people that are so because I think that's an important category, right? Certainly when you think of network APIs, where a lot of the value of the network APIs really in critical communications. It's more secure, it's identity, it's trust, it's quality of network stuff. It's really it's not it's a special category. That's why the telcos are very proud that that's possible. I think it's really important. I mean, we live in an era where there's a lot of shit happening on the internet, and there's a lot of bad traffic and spoofing and everything. So it's great that we're trying to make things a little bit more secure. But for many of these network APIs, there are existing solutions, right? I mean, we all know one-time passwords. We may hate them or we may find them inconvenient, but they're also, we trust them at the same time. So now we're talking to businesses, and maybe in healthcare or maybe in banking, etc. We're talking about how much better these network APIs things are. But we're talking about switching costs, and we're not talking. So we have, on the one side, we have that thing that you guys described. The developer needs to be able to work with it and love it and build a relationship, and it works. That's differently. But then I think on the other side, we also need to educate legal and procurement. You mentioned regulatory, Zach. I mean, there's so much happening in this space. So to switch from an existing solution to something that's arguably better or cheaper, it's not trivial. It needs to be, I mean, in my mind, it needs to be 10 times cheaper and better to make it a no discussion switch. If it's only 20 or 30% better, we need to go through that whole discussion as well with let's say the enterprise part.
Sure, and I think this is a little bit of framing problem. When we talked about network APIs, I think you've got developers some are going to intuitively understand what you're talking about. I think when what you're talking about hitting product owner security people, they're going to be less I would say receptive and intuitive about network APIs. I think here again, it's a little bit of the what's the sales pitch here, or how do you categorize and name it? I think if telcos really want to be successful there, they need to start thinking about some different terminology, like the trust layer. Telcos own the trust layer. That's something. If you're talking to a business owner, product owner, somebody in security, say, we own the trust layer. You're talking to a fintech. I think that's something. Okay, trust. I can. The neurons are firing. I can see. Okay, that's something. If you say, hey, we'd like to talk to you about network APIs, eyes are going to glaze over and they're going to say, please talk to my developer. And then the developer is going to say, yeah, but you need to be telling me more about, is this going to save me time, make money, remove pain points? So I think this is another thing. I mean, I think you have to really, the telcos need to do a better job, I think, of framing this, but saying, hey, we own the trust layer. We are the trust layer of the internet. Okay, great. Good. Tell me more.
Yeah, no, I agree. So talking about the trust layer. So one thing, I mean, life today is a little bit different from 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. I mean, there's this thing with sovereignty. A lot of countries around the world are looking at being more, let's say, independent from big tech for various reasons. And there's also AI that's come onto the scene. And I think AI was sort of funny. If you look at developer space about a year ago, it was funny. And today it seems to be a really important part of what developers or architects or software builders are doing. And we can only imagine where we are 1 or 2 or 3 years from now. And things like agentic. I think the trust layer is a hugely important part in that future of AI and where the world's going.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead,
go on,
Zach.
Greg.
Nope, it's all you.
Now,
Okay,
Zach, you go
okay.
first.
Yeah, I think the thing is, we obviously had the kind of AI boom, and like everything needs to be AI, and AI is going to take over the world. It's going to take all our jobs, and we're all just going to be sitting at home and do. But I think we very quickly realized that that isn't the case, and that AI is just another tool. It's another tool for people to be able to accomplish tasks, and it's a tool that I think more and more developers are seeing as a way to improve their time, no longer having to worry about boilerplate, no longer have to code, no longer have to do all the kind of nitty gritty, boring bits, if you like, about building software. And it's kind of enabling developers to become more like product owners and kind of shaping the product as a whole. And I think that's always been, maybe it's not something that's been talked about enough, but it's always been that shift that makes a developer a senior developer or a lead developer, is that product mindset. I don't think you start out as a developer and you start out and you're given a task, you write code, and that's your job. But as you become more senior, it's more about taking ownership and understanding what a product is, how it works, what you can do to improve it. And I think what AI is allowing us to do is have more time to do that and think about things from that level. So you've kind of got this interesting, I think, thing where you've got product owners who are becoming developers because they can now write code, but you've also got developers who are becoming product owners because they have less, they don't have to write so much code, and they can think about things. So yeah, I think there's an interesting shift there, but I think that's what I'm seeing.
And
I like that.
I think I kind of think of it in terms of like an orchestra. I think, you don't have to be a virtuoso violinist anymore. You need to become a conductor. And I agree with Zach that sort of that big picture thinking. It's like, listen, if I'm the piccolo player in the orchestra, I really don't care what the guy on, the violinist is doing or whatever. I have my part, I have my music, and I think this is where the traditional view of what my job is, as a coder, as a developer, I think I think we're at that point where it is changing right now, where I think rather than becoming the virtuoso violinist, I think you become the conductor, and you can see and understand all the different parts, and it can change your, it can change your perspective, on how you view the entire system, and give you much more deeper insights into the whole of things rather than just your part that you're developing.
Interesting.
But it's still
That's
critical to
interesting
understand. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and as a community builder, an event organizer for developers, right? I mean, this is an interesting change, I imagine, for how you organize your events. Your next one in Paris, I think, is April 9, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Mhm.
So how are you changing your approach to these sorts of events in light of all these changes?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think we're thinking about this a lot, and I think we're thinking about the impact that this is having. I mean, the fact is, again, when we're talking about trust, before, I think there's, again, part of being the conductor in the orchestra, part of understanding is that, there is a difference between having an agent or having Claude Code write something for you and then actually have it be deployed at scale, have it be secure and safe, its scale, and being able to, all the things that go into that, the release management, the cycles. I mean, there's a lot to it. I mean, there is out in my garage, I mean, I could sit there and use Cloud Code and bang out a web app in 10, 15 minutes. Literally, before we jumped in the car, I was doing this today. Before this call, I was doing that today, and in 10 minutes had a working sample of a web app. It is nothing I could deploy to the masses. That's where things break down. So I mean, I think again, you still need the conductors, you need the expertise, and certainly I think, again, if we're sort of staying in this vein of talking about what the telcos can offer if they want to be the trust layer, I think it becomes even more important now in sort of this era of AI assisted code development, to understand, for the companies, for the product owners and the developers, one, what is real? Will these APIs still exist in 3 to 5 years? Are they validated? And I think this is where community events like ours become even more important, because I think so many people are in their silos saying, from top down, from management, here's the tool that you're going to use. We're going to deploy this at the company. Also, by the way, tomorrow, I expect you to be 3 to 10x more productive than you were. Thank you very much. Here you go. Here's your tool. No, go figure it out. And so, I mean, I think we're in the communities reacting to a lot of this, saying, okay, how do we help developers understand what guardrails to put in place? What are the best practices for teams that are doing this at scale? And I think these are all issues that we're all keenly aware of and working on in the community. But this idea of trust is a huge part of it. Can I trust the code that's being output? Is it bloated? Is it going to break down somewhere? Are there things that I'm not seeing? And so I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
Well, good. That keeps us busy, even though AI is threatening to take all our jobs. So this was really great. Thanks a lot, Greg and Zach, for this conversation. I look forward to. I'll report back from Barcelona, and I'll let you know how it goes. I'm involved in some of the sessions there, so this was really valuable input. And then I look forward to see you all in Paris in about 6 weeks or so. Then,
Okay, thanks.
and we continue the conversation there. Thanks a lot.
Excellent.
Looking for it. Thanks,
Thank you.
Rob.